In this module, we will discuss ways to strengthen behavior through prompting and shaping. Prompts are antecedent cues or supports that increase the likelihood that the individual engages in an appropriate behavior in the future. The goal of a prompt is to promote independence in the future. While prompts are an effective way of increasing the likelihood of independent correct responses from the individual in the future, it is important to remember that the use of prompts should be temporary. The goal should always be to fade prompts out as quickly as possible. For example, if a teacher is working with a student to write their name, and they can write their name entirely by themselves except for the last letter, then prompts should only be used for that last letter and not for their entire name. Deciding when to use prompts should be purposeful. Prompts are effective because they help increase the amount of reinforcement the individual will come into contact with. They also help increase the speed of the response, and prompts can be useful in helping reduce a learner's frustration with a new or difficult task, as it reduces the number of times the individual can make an incorrect response. Now that we've discussed when it is appropriate to use prompts, let's talk about the different type of prompts. Response prompts are prompts that are presented by the instructor that are directly related to the response. That would include verbal prompts, gestural prompts, model prompts, and physical prompts. For example, if you gave the instruction for an individual to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you might use physical prompts to assist the individual in making that sandwich. Stimulus prompts are prompts that are presented within the instructional materials. Changing the position or size of materials, or using textual or picture scripts are all examples of stimulus prompts. For example, if you tell an individual to write their name, you may give them a piece of paper with dotted lines so they can trace their name. This is an example of a stimulus prompt. When using prompts, it is important to note that there is a prompting hierarchy. The prompting hierarchy is based on the level of intrusiveness of the prompts that are being used. These prompting hierarchies can be across prompt types. For example, physical prompts are more intrusive than gestural prompts, and within prompt types. For example, full verbal prompts are more intrusive than partial verbal prompts. The goal of the prompting hierarchy is to use the prompt that is most successful in getting the correct response, then adapting the prompt based on the individual's response. So if you are teaching an individual to load a dishwasher, you might initially use a more intrusive physical prompt until the individual can load the dishwasher with less intrusive physical prompts. There are several different types of prompts that you can use. Volume prompts are when you increase the volume of a word or phrase to indicate what an individual should echo or repeat. For example, when prompting the individual to say their name, you might ask, "What is your name?" "John." That John is the volume prompt. Phonemic cues provide only the initial sound or lip placement. If a parent is asking their child to label cat, they might prompt cat. And partial verbal prompts are when you provide part of the response and the rest for the individual to fill in. This might look like an aide in the classroom prompting a student to ask for a break. The aide might say, "I need a," and wait for the student to repeat the sentence and fill in the rest with, "I need a break." Full verbal prompts are when you provide exactly what you want the individual to say, such as, "I want my book." Indirect prompts are when you provide a cue about the desired response. "If you want this train, you can ask me for it." Direct verbal prompts are when you state exactly what the individual should do. Do the first line of math problems. In this prompting hierarchy, a full verbal prompt is the most intrusive, followed by the partial verbal prompt, and then the phonemic vocal prompt. Watch how, in the following video, a mother and father are working with their son to teach him how to appropriately get their attention. The mother pays attention to her son, then tells him that she needs to work. The dad then leans in and delivers a full vocal prompt, "Excuse me," which the son then repeats. Mom then delivers her full attention to her son, which is the reinforcer in this situation.
Whoa, pretty great coloring. That's awesome. Okay, I have some more
work to do.
Excuse me.
Yeah, what's up? Are you coloring this awesome picture? High five, buddy. That's awesome. I love it. Okay, I'm going to keep working.
Excuse me.
Yeah, Max, what's up? What color did you do that? Orange. That's awesome.
Working on that instead of talking. Model prompts are when you model or demonstrate part or all of the desired response. If the teacher is working with a student on writing their letters, the teacher might model and demonstrate how to write specific letters and then ask the student to repeat that. Watch this example of a gestural prompt. The teacher in the classroom asks that the student get out their materials. When one of the students has not yet moved to get out his book, the aide walks by and taps on his desk to indicate that he needs to get out his materials.
Addition to academic vocab. Fabi, will you move our marker to vocab, please? Please get out your academic vocab materials, your quick word dictionary, and your notebook. Looking for groups that are ready in 5, 4, 3, 2. Yes, straight looking like professionals. Thank you, Amal. Thank you, Esmeralda. Thank you, Luna. Nice job. Pointers up. Read the objective with me. Ready? Go.
I will use academic words and...
This is an example of a model prompt. The teacher in the room asks the student to clap their hands, then shows the student how to clap their hands and asks them to repeat that action.
Clap your hands. Good. Clapping your hands.
The last response prompt we will discuss is the physical prompt. Physical prompts are when you physically touch or move the individual in order to engage them in an appropriate response. There is a hierarchy of physical prompts that we will discuss. The least intrusive is a light physical prompt, and this is where you lightly touch the individual to prompt them to respond. This could look like when a student walks in from recess, the student should take off their coat and put it on the coat hook. If the student walks in and stands near the coat hook but doesn't take off their coat, an aide might tap their shoulder to indicate what they should do next. The next intrusive prompt is the partial physical prompt. Partial physical prompts are when you physically guide the individual through part of the response, as if you're getting them started on the response, or you might minimally guide the individual through all of the response. This could look like if you were to prompt an individual to wash your hands, you might lightly physically guide their hands to the sink to turn on the water, and then place their hands under the water. When she independently puts the soap on her hands, you might indicate that she needs to scrub them together by putting the hands together. Finally, there are full physical prompts. Full physical prompts are the most intrusive type of physical prompts. Full physical prompts are when you physically guide the individual through the entire response. This is generally done at the most intrusive level, and it is known as hand-over-hand prompting. An example of a full physical prompt is if a teacher takes the student's hands, grabs the coat off the coat hook, helps him put his arms through one by one, and then physically guides his hands to zip up his coat. Let's watch another video. In this video, the instructor is working on teaching an individual to ask for a break using a small card that says, "I need a break." As soon as the instructor gives a direction, the prompter immediately uses a full physical prompt to guide the student's hand to pick up the card and hand it to the instructor. The instructor immediately gives the student a break for a few seconds before giving a new instruction.
Blue hair. Cool, you can have a break, no problem. Super fun. Yep, you get to hang out. Oh, it's gonna be such a good day today. Oh, I like your white shirt. Cool. All right, break's over. Touch green hair. Oh, cool, you can have a break. Thanks for asking. That was cool. Yep, we're just hanging out. It's super fun. Oh, I like your shoes. Those are so cool. Yeah, it's a fun day. Oh, time to work. Touch yellow hair. Oh, cool. Thanks for asking for a break. You can totally have a break. I love it. We're having so much fun, huh? Yeah, super cool. I love hanging out with you. It's really fun. Awesome. Oh, break's over. Time to work. Touch orange hair. Oh, sure. You can have a break. Nice asking. I like the way you're asking.
Sometimes prompts will be broken down by location of support, from the most intrusive to the least intrusive. It might look like hand over hand, wrist, forearm, elbow, back of the arm, and then shoulder. That's the level of intrusiveness for the physical prompt. It is important that when multiple staff are working with a single individual, that they are on the same page when working with multi-step tasks where the end goal is to increase independence. Now that we've finished discussing response prompts, we are going to discuss stimulus prompts. Stimulus prompts occur when the instructional material or the way in which the materials are presented are modified. This can be done through positional prompts, visual cues, pictures, or textual prompts. Positional prompts are when you move the materials in such a way that the individual will be more successful in engaging in the correct response. This might be when you place the correct stimulus closer to the individual. Visual cues might include altering the size, color, adding in a highlighter, or changing the border of the correct response. Finally, you might include a picture or a textual prompt in the form of cues or scripts. In a classroom, the teacher might arrange a picture schedule for the individual's routine when they're arriving in the morning so that the student can follow each step of the routine. Or the teacher might include textual scripts next to each step of the class project. We have discussed both response and stimulus prompts and what they might look like. So now, let's talk about how to choose a prompt. Prompts should be chosen based on the desired response. Is the prompt practical and appropriate for the target response? The individual's current response repertoire and needs. Does the individual know the skill already, have similar skills, or doesn't know the skill at all? And the individual's learning history, their attending skills, imitation repertoire, and acceptance of physical prompts. Remember that these prompts should be directly related to the response. So if you are requiring a vocal response, your prompt should also be vocal. To demonstrate the response without prompts. This will assess if the individual knows the response or how much they know of the response already. Use a least to most prompting to determine at exactly what point or level the individual can be successful. This is when you start teaching the skill at the least intrusive but most effective prompt, and then fade that until the individual is demonstrating the skill independently. So be sure to prompt the individual from behind, like a shadow, when teaching the skills that the individual should be able to perform successfully in the absence of others, such as dressing, brushing teeth, and independent activity schedules. You should also prompt from behind when teaching PECs, if possible, as well as when facilitating peer interactions. The reason for prompting behavior is so you can provide reinforcement for that behavior. So it is important to reinforce prompted responses, especially when first beginning to teach a new skill. This reinforcement helps provide the motivation for the individual to learn that new behavior. Additionally, by providing prompts, not only are you helping the individual reach reinforcement, but you are helping potentially reduce that frustration with a new or difficult behavior. Save your really exciting reinforcement for independent, correct responses, especially as the individual is picking up on the new skill and beginning to exhibit that skill more independently. Ideally, prompts should be used only during acquisition skills. Work to transfer that stimulus control from the prompt to some naturally existing stimuli quickly by using fading procedures. Be wary of prompt dependence. This is when the individual relies on you to totally complete either parts or the entire skill. Prompt dependence may occur because you did not fade the prompt quickly enough or used a more intrusive prompt longer than needed. We will be discussing how to fade prompts in the next module. Now that we have finished discussing prompting, we are going to talk about using a process called shaping to strengthen behavior. Shaping is a process in which one systematically and differentially reinforces successive approximations to a complete behavior. Shaping is used to help learners acquire new behaviors. Let's talk about some of the terms that we use to describe what shaping is. Differential reinforcement is when one type, level, or approximation of a response is reinforced while others are not. Successive approximations are when the response is slowly getting closer and closer to the final desired behavior or response. You might be asking yourself, why or when should we be using shaping? Shaping is used to teach complex or difficult behaviors such as speech, when the instruction or modeling is not enough. Shaping is used in many instructional and everyday situations, and shaping is also an effective method for establishing new behaviors. The advantages of shaping include eliminating trial and error teaching methods by allowing the individual to consistently contact reinforcement. Shaping can be used to teach new behaviors, and shaping is a positive procedure, that is, it is generally not aversive or punishing. It leads the individual to the correct response. And finally, shaping helps reduce behavior problems and sets the individual up for success. Response differentiation involves two components. The first is differentially reinforcing behaviors that resemble the terminal behavior, and the second is carefully changing the criterion for reinforcement. The result will be increases in the behaviors successively closer to the terminal behavior and decreasing behaviors that are not successively closer to the terminal behavior. For example, if you are working with an individual to teach them to use cards to ask for a break, the end goal is for the individual to pick up the card and hand it to you and then get the break. So initially, the criterion should be that the individual needs to touch the card, then they get a break. After many successful trials of this, you might increase the criterion so that the student just needs to pick up the card and they will get a break. After the individual masters picking up the card, you might change the criterion again to where the individual needs to pick up the card and hand it to you. Then they finally get the break, which, if you remember, was our terminal behavior. There are different dimensions of behaviors that can be shaped. This might include the topography or the form of the behavior, the physical form, the frequency, the number of responses per unit of time. So let's say a teacher in a classroom wants a particular student to raise their hand in class more frequently. The teacher will reinforce the student each time he raises his hand. The latency, or time between the onset of the antecedent stimulus and the occurrence of the behavior. So if in that same classroom the teacher has a different student that raises their hand an excessive number of times, the teacher might reinforce the longer lengths of time between hand raising. or the duration, which is the total elapsed time for the occurrence of the behavior. For example, a parent might want to reinforce their child brushing their teeth for longer and longer amounts of time. Finally, the magnitude of behavior can also be shaped. If a teacher is working with a student who whispers all of their answers, the teacher might work with the student to speak louder and louder until they are talking in a normal speaking voice. Or, if a child hits their dog, a parent might want to reinforce softer touching until the child only pets the dog. Shaping can occur across and within response topographies. When shaping occurs across response topographies, the behavior changes during shaping. Behaviors are still members of the same response class. When the shaping occurs within response topographies, the topography of the behavior remains constant. This means that another measurable dimension of the behavior is changed, for example, the duration of the behavior. Some positive aspects of shaping are that shaping can teach those new behaviors, and it is also a positive approach to teaching, so it can be combined with other procedures such as chaining, which we will talk about in the next module. There are some limitations of shaping. Shaping can be very time-consuming. Progress is not always linear and may be erratic at times, and shaping requires a skillful trainer who can recognize subtly closer approximations to the final response. Finally, shaping can be misapplied, so problem or harmful behaviors can accidentally be shaped. At this point, you may be asking yourself, what is the difference between shaping and fading? Well, both are used to change behavior gradually. However, shaping a behavior is done by changing the response requirements, and fading is implemented by changing the antecedent stimuli. So let's talk about some of the guidelines for implementing shaping. Be sure to consider the nature of the behavior that needs to be learned and the resources available. So how far away is the individual from the current performance to the terminal behavior? This might include how long the shaping might take, what is the availability of staff and other resources, and if you do not have an experienced staff to work with the behavior, this might be the time to implement shaping. Remember that shaping is a labor and time-intensive procedure. You can select the terminal behavior by asking yourself, how will the behavior change contribute to the learner's independence in gaining reinforcement? Also, ensure that you define the terminal behavior precisely by using an operational definition. Then, you and other staff will know when that behavior has or has not occurred. Then you will need to determine your criteria for success. So how accurate, how fast, how long, or how intense should the behavior be performed? And under what conditions should it be performed? Look at the norms of other individuals in that same age range by observing similar peer groups and consulting behavior analytic literature. You should also identify the approximations that might be omitted during training. That way, you are able to be in a better position to stay ahead of the individual and anticipate new approximations. You might be able to predict those new approximations by consulting experts in the field, or using published literature, or watching peers perform the same task and performing those same behaviors. Next, you will identify the first behavior to reinforce. The behavior should already be occurring at some level, and the behavior should also be a member of the target response class. A response class is a group of behaviors that have similar effects on the environment. For example, if you are teaching somebody to open a door, the goal is to open the door, so you can open the door with your elbow, your hip, one hand, both of your hands, your back, and the list goes on. These are all different behaviors, but they achieve the same goal, which is opening that door. While working on shaping a certain behavior, eliminate any possible distractions during training. Be sure to proceed in gradual stages and don't go too fast. However, be prepared for decrements in performance when you increase the criteria. Let's talk about how to make successful shaping procedures. There are 10 steps to follow. First, raise criteria in increments small enough so that the subject always has a realistic chance for reinforcement. Second, train one aspect of any particular behavior at a time. Don't try to shape for 2 criteria simultaneously. And third, during shaping, Put the current level of response onto a variable schedule of reinforcement before adding or raising the criterion. This means that the learner should not know when they will receive reinforcement for completing a task. Next, when introducing a new criterion or aspect of the behavior, temporarily relax the old criteria. After that, stay ahead of your subject. Plan your shaping program completely so that if the subject makes sudden progress, you are aware of what to reinforce next. And don't change trainers midstream. You can have several trainers per trainee, but stick to one shaper per behavior. If one shaping procedure is not producing progress, find another. There are many ways to get behavior to shape up. Don't interrupt a training session gratuitously. And if a behavior deteriorates, go back to kindergarten. Quickly review the whole shaping process with a series of easily earned reinforcers. And lastly, quit each session on a high note. That means always end a session when the individual is receiving reinforcement for a series of successful responses. Let's now use an example to demonstrate what shaping might look like in a real-life situation. Imagine that you have a young individual that you are beginning to teach toilet training, but she will not go near the bathroom or even begin to toilet. You might place the favorite items of the individual in the bathroom stall, so pictures of Elsa and Anna water toys. Initially, the girl received reinforcers, water toys, for sitting in the chair near the doorway to the bathroom. For the next step, she will receive reinforcement for sitting in the chair inside the bathroom. The chair might then slowly be moved to the door of the bathroom stall and eventually into the stall. Next, the girl will receive her reinforcer for sitting on the toilet with her pants up. Finally, she receives the reinforcer for sitting on the toilet with her pants down, and toilet training could begin. This whole process might take approximately 2 weeks to accomplish. Now that we've talked about the whole shaping procedure, let's talk about some more examples. Let's imagine we are working with an early learner with emerging language. The target behavior we are looking for is the word cookie. Our first approximation is that the student can say ka. They are already saying ka, so the shaping process would begin with that first step by modeling the first approximation. Each time the student says ka, you will immediately provide reinforcement. Our next step might be reinforcing every time that the student says k. As you can see, our shaping procedure is slowly getting closer and closer to the word cookie. In step 3, we will be providing reinforcement for each time the student says cook, or the first syllable of the word. You will be providing reinforcement for each time that the student says that, and withhold reinforcement for all of the previous approximations, so ka and k. Finally, the last step will be to provide reinforcement each time the student says cookie, and withhold reinforcement for all of the other sounds that we've previously taught.